everybody. This is Ellen Weatherford. I'm here as usual with just the zoo of us. I'm excited today to talk to, this is not necessarily a new friend because we've spoken before. This is Dr. Yanasivan Kisten. Say hi, Yanis.
Hello. Happy to be here. Happy to see you again.
Of course. So I say that we've spoken before because you do a podcast called Geekoscopy, which is a really, really fun podcast. And I was on to talk to you, I guess it was last year, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. It was a while ago.
Yeah. So we've spoken before. And while we were on that call, you mentioned that you were a marine biologist and you work on estuaries in South Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you got into it?
Yeah, so I like to call myself kind of a marine and estuarine ecophysiologist, especially with animals.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, I think I have to niche it down quite a bit because like calling myself a marine biologist, like probably puts images in people's minds about like dolphins and whales and stuff. And I don't study anything closely related to dolphins and whales. I'm on the other side of the, genetic tree, closer to the invertebrate side. But essentially what I've enjoyed doing or have been interested in during my research career is looking at how the changes in the environment affects an animal's health, essentially, its physiology. I have looked at things like how metal toxins in the water, like copper, zinc, affect filter-feeding species like mussels. I've done work with coral bleaching, specifically looking at ways that corals can mitigate bleaching effects. I've looked at things like how lighting affects how fishes feed. And more recently, I've just looked at various aspects of how the environment and the ways that we change as humans change the environment, how it affects overall fish biology, whether it's the ecology, whether it's their behavior, whether it changes how they feed, how they respire. So, I'm a marine and estuarine ecophysiologist.
I love that because it's kind of zoomed out, right? We're looking at not just the animal, but the context that the animal lives in, right? Not just the immediate surroundings, like necessarily like the immediate food chain that this animal is in, right? But everything around it that affects the way it lives, including the way that humans are impacting it. I'm sure you find a lot of really interesting stuff out there. What does your work look like? Like, what does a day in the life of an ecophysiologist look like?
I think with ecophysiologists, a lot of it is bringing animals back from the wild and putting them in a controlled environment so that you can control various aspects that you want to look at. So if you want to test, okay, if I set the temperature at this, how is that going to affect, the animal or the fish? If I change the salinity, how salty the water is, if I want to see how that affects how they breathe or anything like that, then I can set it and control for everything else. Like if I want to keep the temperature at a certain level or the, salt level, the pH or anything like that. So ecophysiologists will basically change one or two parameters, and see how it affects the animal so that we can relate in the marine environment. We can then predict if, the temperature changes, like we think it's going to global warming, how is that going to affect, the individual animal? And then we can make predictions on the populations. So it's important for figuring out as your environment changes, what's going to happen to the overall ecology.
You told me that your study species is this fish called the Cape Stumpnose.
Yes, Breptosaurus hulubi.
That's very catchy. I love the rhythm to that. That's kind of a bouncy name, isn't it?
It is rhythmic, yeah.
So this is not a fish that lives where I live, so I don't know anything about it. Can you introduce me a little bit to this Cape Stumpnose?
So the Cape Stumpnose is endemic to South Africa. It has a wide distribution along the southern African coast. Pretty much all along our borders, also going up into Mozambique a bit. But it's very common here. Like it occurs almost everywhere, especially in estuaries where the baby, stage of the fish lives in, because the estuaries it's a kind of nursery area. That's where, they grow up before they reach maturity. But they're quite common, not necessarily endangered yet, but with the global changing world, we are seeing potential impacts that might be affecting their ecology. And essentially, they're very important recreationally because a lot of fishermen target them in estuaries and in the marine environment as well. And they're important ecologically because they act kind of like omnivores or herbivores because they feed on like seagrasses. They also are important prey species for larger fish and especially birds in estuaries. And a lot of people here like to do birding, a lot of naturalists. And if you don't have a lot of fish prey species around, you're going to lose the birds as well. So they're quite important in these ecosystems, quite common now, quite numerous because of their relative hardiness compared to other species. So very important to the overall ecosystem.
If we could take a quick second to hit pause and give some context to people who live more inland and maybe aren't familiar with like marine and coastal terminology, can you describe what you mean by an estuary?
So an estuary is a kind of meeting place between freshwater or riverine systems. So what's like coming down, the mountains, the valleys, getting into streams and then becoming rivers. That's usually not saline, maybe a bit brackish as you come down. So it's very fresh. It's like the water that comes out of your tap, So it's a meeting between that and the salty marine water. That's like what you get at a beach. If you take a sip of that, it's quite salty. So at this meeting place, it creates this very highly productive system because there's a lot of nutrients that comes down, your river streams. All things like leaf litter and like twigs and barks like kind of get broken down as it flows down and it gets dissolved, and all that nutrients kind of hits this salty environment, and it creates this environment that just has so much nutrients that then gets fed to phytoplankton and just like fizzles up the food chain, all the way to like larval and juvenile fish. So estuaries are quite important for productivity because of all the nutrients that's flowing down the river. And also estuaries also serve as these nursery areas for what we call early stage fish, also early stage invertebrates and anything planktonic, because it's kind of a sheltered environment compared to an open, large marine ecosystem where there's very big predators, floating around ready to eat anything. There's a lot of different, nooks and crannies that occur in estuary, like, seaweed grass beds or mud flats or mangroves or any tiny holes that little things can hide from and also potentially feed on. So it's just this really cool place where a lot of ecological action is happening. It's really important not only in that place, but then further out into the marine environment where all the adults of some of these animals are that, then spawn, and the babies then go and try and find the estuaries once again so they grow up, and it goes in this cycle. And we usually call those type of species marine estuarine dependent species. So they're dependent on estuaries for their entire life cycle. And if they don't have access to estuaries, it's potentially very, destructive for populations. And then you also get some other fishes and animals that just use estuaries just because they can, but they don't really need to. So we call those marine opportunists. So they also use estuaries, especially the smaller ones, to grow up. So it's a very important ecosystem that's important overall to not only the ecology of the ecosystems, but also if you want to go and start, catching fish, if they don't complete their life cycle, you're not going to get any fish to catch. So it's important also for food security and recreation and integral systems.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think that maybe it's not something that people think about very often, right? If you're not necessarily living in these estuary like areas where you'll find these sort of meeting places between the marine environment and the freshwater environment. It makes more sense when you think about it. Like they've got to meet somewhere, right? Like you don't just, there's not like a line in the sand where it's like everything past this point is freshwater.
It's not a force field where there's a barrier like between salty and fresh water.
Salt may not pass through here.
Yeah, you shall not pass. Salt.
So the Cape Stumpnose is a fish that you mentioned has their babies in the, I love this word nursery. They have a nursery in the estuary, which I think is very charming to me. Yeah. Do the adults hang out in the estuary, or do they kind of like leave their babies and just kind of peace out?
No, the adults are spawning out at in the nearshore environment, so they're not really anywhere near the estuary. After reaching, sexual maturity, when they become a sub-adult or an adult, their kind of teat changes and they begin feeding on something totally different. So the plankton is feeding on, other zooplankton. It's like invertebrate larvae or copepods and things like that. And then when they become juveniles, they're then feeding on the vegetation. They kind of want access to things that are living on the vegetation, like smaller plants or algae or other animals that are living on it. That's what they actually are digesting. And then when they get to adulthood, they really want to go back out at sea and feed on things that are growing out there. So yeah, the adults are not usually hanging around where the juveniles are.
You mentioned that they're important as both sort of predator and prey, right? So since they have this sort of important, like, middle level in the food chain, I guess I shouldn't say food chain, right? We don't say food chain anymore. Food. Yeah, it's a web, yeah. The food web, the food sphere.
It's very multifaceted.
Yeah.
And especially when you're looking at things like in estuaries, a certain species might hold different levels on the food chain, and sometimes species are like feeding on the young as well. So it's like it wraps around all the linkages in an estuary. It's very convoluted. It's not a chain at all. It's a messy net. Yeah.
I know. I think we should stop getting the word food chain like embedded into like little kids' minds and be like, it's not that simple. It's okay. But so for the Cape Stumpnose that is both predator and prey, this is a good opportunity to talk about our first category that we rate animals on, which is our whole thing that we do for this particular podcast. If this is your first time listening, our first category that we rate animals on is effectiveness. And these are physical adaptations that let the animal do a good job of the things that it's trying to do. So this animal is trying to eat things. It is trying not to get eaten by other things. It is trying to make more of itself. So It has some goals in mind. What would you rate the Cape Stumpnose out of 10 for effectiveness?
Oh, I would rate it. Yeah, I would rate it a 10 out of 10.
Really?
It is designed to survive and reproduce. I affectionately like to call this Cape Stumpnose like the cockroach of the sea. It's the cockroach of estuaries. It's very difficult to kill them.
Really?
They can survive at salinities almost like 3 times marine water, so like up to 90 salinity. It's pretty difficult to kill them. So they're actually usually one of the last like fish to remain in an estuary during a drought where, all the fresh water kind of gets evaporated out and you get salinities up to like 70, 80, 90. And the juveniles are adapted to live in vegetated areas. So they kind of try and hide away from a lot of potential predators. So they have, behavioral adaptations for that. They also feed on what's sheltering them. So, they're getting nutrition. You have to have a certain type of dentistry in order to feed that way. Whereas, other fish are just designed to like just gulp and scoop prey. They're busy like chewing away like cows in a field.
When you say dentistry, what does fish dentistry look like?
Geez, that's difficult.
Sorry.
I haven't looked at it too deeply, but of course you're going to have a different way of eating if you have to chomp on a piece of grass versus just swallow a tiny fish. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to cut through and, sift out. I don't think they necessarily have anything to sift out. But fish have different type of ways of feeding. You have like gill rakers, which kind of like, swallow water and kind of filter tiny invertebrates out. You have fish like the parrotfish that kind of feed on corals and things. So they have like a beak-like mouth. So yeah, I mean, there's tons of fish in the ocean and estuaries, and there's tons of ways they can eat things, and they need to be adapted to eat that way. You know, it's like the Darwin's finches type of story.
Yeah. Does the Cape Stumpnose kind of have like the best of both worlds? Because you said it's like omnivorous. So it sounds like they're able to go either way, really. It sounds like they can, you know, eat little critters or have themselves a little salad snack if they want to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like when I bring them back from the wild into the lab, I'm feeding them on freshly hatched brine shrimp. So they do feed, you know, in that predatory way as well. They can.
Is this a particularly big fish?
In the estuaries, they only go up to about, I think, 14 centimeters before they considered an adult or a sub-adult. So you catch them between like 4 centimeters and about 140 millimeters, so 14 centimeters. Yeah. So basically like the size of your finger to maybe your palm.
That is about 5.5 inches for people like me who use imperial units, tragically.
Yeah, all 2 countries that do. Yeah.
All whopping 2 countries. I'm still trying to push for that metric conversion, but that's just me. It's an uphill battle. One day we'll join the rest of you. It's really funny to me that you called them the cockroach of the estuary, because that seems like it has a negative connotation, but I get what you mean. Like they're indestructible, they're hardy, really resistant to, I suppose, environmental changes.
Very resilient, yeah.
When it comes to predators that may be trying to eat them, what are their primary sort of predator concerns? And do they have anything that they can use? Like, do they have any tools in their belt that can help them not get eaten?
Geez, I mean, the predatory concerns would be larger, you know, piscivorous fish. Well, piscivorous means you're feeding on fish. So if you say a piscivorous fish, it's a fish that feeds on fish. Then you have birds as well. And yeah, those are the 2 major threats, I think, for them. And like I said, it's mostly behavioral, like they're hiding away where they can. But in terms of defense, I don't think they've adapted that well to overall defense. I think most of the, you know, the points that they used up in the evolutionary chain is all going to like salinity, resistance.
They maxed out their constitution score.
Exactly. Yeah. So it just looks like a silver fish. But yeah, internally, when you look underneath the surface, that's where the interesting stuff, you know, happens. So.
Well, let's dig into that then. So the next category that we rate animals on is ingenuity. So this is behavioral adaptations that the animal does, things that they do with their body to help them eat other things, not get eaten themselves, and make more of themselves. What do you give them out of 10 for ingenuity?
Ingenuity, I would give them probably a solid 8.
Okay, that's pretty good.
They're pretty good in figuring out where their niche is. They try and hide themselves away. They reproduce in large numbers. They're very opportunist in the way that they kind of spawn. They spawn pretty much throughout the year. It's a very like short period where they're not spawning. And yeah, so they're busy looking for an estuary to get into once they spawn out at sea, and in very high numbers. So it's one of those species where, you know, you fight with numbers instead of, you know, personal protection. And yeah, use behavioral methods of hiding yourself and not being eaten.
They're like, we'll just make so many of us that one of us is bound to survive.
Yeah. It works. For sure. Yeah. If you think about, you know, how hardy they are in terms of salinity, that means they are able to occupy many more estuaries than other fish would be able to. So they just have a larger opportunity to exist than certain other fishes would be able to.
That's very clever. I love this, that they're more of like a generalist than a specialist, right? So they're like, all right, we might not be absolutely amazing at this thing, but instead we're going to be kind of good at being anywhere we want.
For sure. Kind of like us in that regard, yeah.
when you go out, you catch them in the wild, you bring them back. Is it to a lab that you bring them to? Or like, what is the environment like that you are studying them in?
Yeah, it's essentially like it's an aquarium, like you would have for keeping pet fish. We have ones that are more sterile and controlled. We put them in there and then we will take them out and put them into whatever type of apparatus we're using to measure. If we're measuring respiration, you put them into an oxygen chamber and you measure how well they are breathing. If you want to test how the salinity levels are, then you just put them in different kind of containers with different salinities and you see how they react to them. If you're doing like blood work, you would take a drop of blood and look at cortisol if you want to look at stress, lipids, all types of potential things, DNA if you wanted to. So yeah, it's a wide variety of, different instruments I've used over the years. And that's, I think, is kind of what's cool about, doing physiological work. You could test multiple different, what we would call biomarkers and look at how they react to however you're trying to torture them.
Oh, no. So when you're changing these sort of circumstances that you're observing them in, does this change their behavior? Like, say you change the salinity or you change the temperature or you change whatever marker about the water that you're looking at. Like, does that seem to phase them as far as their behavior goes, or are they just kind of living their life the only way they know how?
Yeah, you do get various different behaviors with fish depending on what kind of what you're subjecting them to. Generally, if fish are kind of stressed out in some way, some of them will kind of try and breathe using the air. So they'll come up to the surface and they'll kind of like bubble. Then, yeah, if a fish is really struggling, they might just be like swimming around frantically trying to get out of it.
Oh no, poor baby.
Yeah, if something is close to dying, it's probably like gone belly up and like is swimming upside down. If fish are if they have like bacterial parasites or whatever, they'll try and like scrape their skin against, the side of the tank and stuff like that. So there's various different adaptations that they might have. Sometimes, they just want to, if they're finding it difficult to breathe, then they'll like kind of fan their gills. So yeah, there's various, different behavioral things that they could do. But a lot of it is going to be, what's going on inside, especially when it comes to things like salinity, they have internal mechanisms, renal pathways, different ways that, their gills are actually trying to, get the salt out. When it comes to Rhabdophagus, they have really good chloride cells that can excrete chloride back into the environment. It's actually new research that one of my friends is doing in the lab now.
That's really exciting.
They're just such a hardy species on the inside that they have, I think, less outward effects until it's really bad. Like, I think you only start seeing them really look distressed at like twice the salinity of seawater, which is pretty high. It's like around 70. 80. And then, yeah, they're not happy that you just put them in very salty water and they try to like get out.
This is absolutely not the canary in the coal mine, right? These things are like,
no,
these things will make it to the core of the earth before they're like phased by anything.
Yeah, they're not what we would call bioindicator species that will, tell you ahead of time if there's anything that's going wrong. They will be the last ones there.
That's great for them. Is that ever like kind of frustrating that like no matter what you do to them, they're like, this is fine?
Yeah, I suppose when it comes to the data that comes out and it's not really that neat that it shows a significant difference, I suppose that's a bit frustrating when you're writing up. But obviously, like, I don't really want to see any type of animal that's kind of like in distress, So
yeah.
I suppose I'm rooting for the fish to actually survive. I suppose it's a double-edged sword, this type of work, yeah.
Are these fish do they get along with each other? Like, do they kind of group up and swim with other Cape Stumpnoses, or are they just doing their own thing?
Yeah, they do show. They do swim around together. It's quite cool, actually, because they would actually also show with other types of silverfish as well. And they do it like very innately. It's like kind of we need to like stick together and like keep each other safe and like with, herds of zebra that try, kind of confuse predators visually. Yeah, they're going to be cool with some of the marine opportunists. Like we have a very similar species called a blacktail, which looks pretty much like a Cape Stumpnose. It just has like a black spot on its tail. There are other differences, but it's like difficult to see from far. And they're opportunists, so they don't need the estuary for their life cycle. But they do hang around with Cape Stumpnose in shoals, in the grass patches, the seagrass patches. Also, on the smaller end, the larvae might also hang around with mullet larvae sometimes. So yeah, they're cool with other fish, I think, their size.
Like a friendship based on not being able to fit in each other's mouth.
Yeah. I think that's the general idea. Yeah. If you can't eat me, I'm pretty much your friend. Unless you're small enough for me to eat you, in which case, your dinner.
A bond based on similar size.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
I wish that humans could be like that. We could be like, hey, we're roughly the same size. Let's buddy up.
Yeah. You're going down the same road, right? Yeah, I'll just join you. Yeah.
If we're talking ingenuity, that's a pretty clever thing to do, right? Like group up with all your buds so that, and that kind of goes back to that, like they can't eat all of us thing, right? Like, if there's 20 of us all swimming together, then that decreases the chance of the predator eating you because now there's 19 other fish you could eat.
Exactly. Yeah. Comes down to numbers. It's just less opportunity for you to get eaten if you're surrounded by, 20 other guys. It's
that adage of like, you don't have to be the fastest, you just have to run faster than the other guy.
The slowest guy, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So the last category that we rate animals on is aesthetics. And you kind of have described the way that this fish looks already. But what would you score this animal on for aesthetics? And aesthetics is totally arbitrary. It's just your opinion. Just like how nice are they to look at?
I mean, I would say they're average. I'd give it a maybe 5, maybe a 6 on a good day. It's not something that is so like distinguishable from other species that are similar to it, like if you pull a seine net in the estuary, and if you catch a few of these, you're not going to be as excited as if you caught like a very funky looking goby that's, brightly colored, or a cuttlefish. Sometimes you're going to look at the cuttlefish instead of, one of these other silverfish. It seems to like just be thousands of them. So I like, silverfish in terms of the importance in the overall estuary. They're not very charismatic compared to other types of more colorful things, but their importance is so integral to the ecosystem functioning. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I came on this podcast, to give some props to just bland looking fish, because they're important. And we need to focus on them. It might not be like a red-lipped batfish or a black-tip shark or anything funky that you can find in the deep sea or anything, but they play such a integral part of the ecosystem, so they need a bit more attention, I think.
Oh yeah, they're a little more subtle with their style.
Yeah, low key fish. Yeah.
Also, like, when you're not so flashy and you're not so colorful, you're not necessarily drawing attention to yourself, right? So like maybe a little bit advantageous to them to not be so ornamented, I suppose. I don't know if that plays into it at all, but there could be some function to the form also, not being so, flashy looking, I suppose.
It gets them around.
Is it ever at all difficult to find the fish?
Not Rhabdothogus holubi. I think if you pull a net over any seagrass, Zostrocapensis eelgrass patch, you're probably gonna get a Cape Stumpnose in there, or a blacktail if you're looking. Like I said, they're a very common species in South African estuaries. Almost ubiquitous, I think, is the word that some fish biologists use. So yeah, they're around, and there's a lot of them.
That is just a testament to how successful they are.
They are success stories, yeah.
Oh, yeah. When you can be found, like, it's like throw a rock and you're going to hit one. Like, I feel like that is just the hallmark of, like, a successful animal.
And in a lot of different estuaries with different temperatures, different salinities, different types of habitats. Yeah, that you can find them in very diverse environments.
I love this fish. And I also feel like I have a deeper appreciation for like a lot of times I'll go out to maybe like the stream or the beach or something like that and see tons of these, just little unassuming, like minnows or just little guys, right? Just swimming around in the water. And I think it's easy to just kind of shrug them off and discount them. But I think that I have a better appreciation now for the subtle guys, right?
The regular guys, yeah.
The average Joe, just your everyday fish. They're very cool. So before we wrap up, I wanted to kind of let you talk to us about anything that you're working on right now. I'd love for you to talk about geekoscopy and boost that a little bit and like where people can find you and stuff.
Currently, in terms of research work, I'm looking at what exactly attracts, the baby fish to the estuaries. We have a general idea, but we don't know exactly. So that's what my current research is about. Just to, I think, put a overall cap on the research science side. And then, I like to say that I'm a scientist by day and an internet content creator by night. And I've started many, many different podcasts and YouTube, and I've written blogs and various different ways to communicate over the internet. And now I've decided to kind of blend, my daytime work with, my nighttime kind of hobbies. And that ended up in looking at, funky and interesting ways that we can communicate science, going from, the scientist and a research paper, which is very difficult for an average lay person to be able to read and understand, to then combining that in a way that can be consumed and digested by, the general public or the average dude on the street. And, different scientists are now trying to look at different ways in order to teach what they are busy researching. And it's not every person is going to be able to consume that kind of information in any media form. Like different people like to consume information in different ways, whether it's, listening to a podcast when you kind of, cooking, cleaning and stuff like that, versus watching a video essay on YouTube that's, well produced and this kind of very, flashy images that keeps you captivated. Or if it's, a full blockbuster movie versus, a series, or maybe even, trying to convey information while somebody is engrossed in a video game, where they have, more than just their attention. It's also like tactical and physical. So Geekoscopy 101 is a podcast where I like to explore this kind of meeting place, this nexus between the science, the research, the different stories that we can tell with that research, and then different stories that scientists have during their course of researching, and also general stories that just captivates people, so that they can sort of as a side effect learn something new. So I like to just wonder and philosophize about how we can convey this information so that different people can understand it, and then it may, change the way that they make decisions in the future that'll help out, their fellow man and everyone, and us push the drive forward for humanity, and we don't end up in a, galactic ditch. So that's the general idea behind Geekoscopy 101.
It's very fun.
I interview different science communicators like you.
I was on there and it was very fun. We talked for a good while, and I'm pretty sure didn't Vikram join you as well?
Yeah, Dr. Baliga was on there talking about his podcast. I think we actually got to the podcast like last because he's just so entertaining and just so interesting to talk to. So we were talking about SciComm in general.
What a dream team.
Yeah, for sure.
And where can people best find Geekoscopy 101?
So you can go to geekoscopy.com. And you should be able to find everything there. Otherwise, I have a link tree. So I think it's link.tree/geekoscopy. And you'll find links to all of my various different platforms that you can go and, like, follow, subscribe to.
Definitely. I highly recommend it. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Well, I think that's all we've got for today. So I just want to thank you for your time and your knowledge, sharing all of your knowledge about this little fish with us, and also about the ecology of estuaries and the sort of, zoomed out context that the fish lives in. And just that's an important piece of it, right? Like, it's not just about the individual animal. It's about everything going on around it. So hopefully maybe we've inspired a brand new ecophysiologist out there who might be listening, like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been fun chatting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.
Cheers.
Bye.